Welcome to episode 302 of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. My name is Dave Deacon, and have we got an exceptional episode for you this week. We get a lesson on leasing land from the lawyer from Leedy when we talk with Professor of Ag Law at Oklahoma State University, Dr. Shannon Farrell. We learn about the importance of creating a written lease and the dangers of building a land legacy on a handshake agreement when we talked with him from the Oklahoma Wheat Commission and the Oklahoma Wheat Growers Association booth at the KNID AgriFest just last week. By the way, you'll be able to find the information that we talk about on this episode and all of our past episodes on our website, reddirtagronomy.com. As always, we start with a quick trip around the table for an introduction to the dream team of dirt and everything that grows from it. Let's start with Oklahoma State University Extension Cropping System Specialist.
Inappropriate would have been what I would have said, but I'm glad it was the lawyer that used it.
Dr. Josh Lofton. Next to him is the Extension Specialist for Fire Ecology with Oklahoma State University.
Nobody ever come and told them that they were sorry, and that's a big deal. So a lot of that stuff seems to stem from just misunderstandings.
The one and only John Weir. And next to him is Oklahoma State University Extension Precision Nutrient Management Specialist.
We're setting you up with HR on Tuesday.
Dr. Brian Arnell. Before we get to Shannon, we're taking a quick look at the crops across Oklahoma and how they're doing in this really cold and wet time of year. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. I guess let's start off with we're here at the KNID AgriFest in Enid. Special thanks to the Oklahoma Wheat Commission and the Oklahoma Wheat Growers Association for setting us up so close to their cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, it smells too good.
Have you guys had your cinnamon rolls yet?
Affirmative. Only a quarter. We should really get a full-size cinnamon roll is what I think.
You know,
they just want you to keep coming back. Well, it's bread after lunch, so it'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, last year I was gifted a whole tray of cinnamon rolls. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's fat and sassy.
I know. I was like, wow.
So was Dave after that.
Right.
And he didn't share.
No. And my wife's like, didn't we get cinnamon rolls? And I thought, no, I don't know what you're talking about.
We didn't. I did.
Right. Yeah. there were cinnamon rolls at some point, but no. Yeah, we're here at the AgriFest, and this is actually being recorded on Friday, January 12th, 2024. And I guess let's dive in with a crop update. Where are we? I mean,
it's cold, Dave.
I was going to say right now it's really cold.
It's going to get colder.
And the thing is,
end of story.
This will be this will air Monday or Tuesday, and at that
really
point
cold.
It's going to be really super cold. But,
all right.
So let's dive in. Where are we with the wheat crop? I mean, we've actually had some moisture.
No, yeah. The wheat looks the best we've had. Some of the best statewide fall grazing we've probably had in 4 or 5 years. Pockets down southwest had grazing last fall, but we really haven't had a statewide grazing year like we do this year. The grain only, for most of it, got in very timely, got good stands. The late sown is still up small. Hearing from the whole area, especially those that are running in rich strips, Jimmy Kinder was talking on his grain only. His strips had already popped up down the south. We don't have a lot of growth and demand on the non-grain only, or on the grain only, so it's small, so we have time to wait. Let's get through this cold. If the ground's frozen on Monday when the people are listening, get your sprayers, get your spreaders out, and put some in-rich strips out would be my deal. Grain only, sub 60 bushel. I'm still wanting to hold. We're having really good response in holding back on that nitrogen till into February and March. If you're pushing that 80, 90, 100 bushel realm and you don't have anything on, go ahead and get that green up shot out when we start warming up, that 20 to 30 units of nitrogen. And then follow up with that March, February, March, even early April shot to top it off. That's going to really help with your lodging on that higher yielding, keep that early vegetative growth down, keep that wheat standing. The graze outs and the dual purpose folks, we've had a lot of production. We've had a lot of beef gain.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of them had the nitrogen down, but I would be looking at top dressing pretty soon, especially when that wheat kicks up and again. Just the growth that we had, and if you look at nitrogen cells, we're probably due a shot of nitrogen on our dual purpose and graze out. You can look at gain. There's some easy math you kind of look at is like how much gain do I think I have versus how much wheat does it take, and then how much nitrogen do I put down. But watch the cowpox coming in from Stillwater and Enid. Saw more than one field with cowpox that's being grazed. So if you got those, let's rock and roll and get nitrogen on in the next couple of weeks.
Well, and the price of some of the inputs are not as steep as they were in the past. So I mean, this especially with the rainfall, with the moisture that we've had, this is turning out to be a year that you want to put the inputs in.
We're setting up. I'd still like to see in regions the pond levels. I'd like to see in some of our areas. The ponds are still short, which means our subsoil moisture hasn't rebuilt everywhere.
Right.
We've been getting these nice timely rains to keep the wheat rolling, but we haven't had those rain events statewide that is a profile filler.
Exactly.
So that means if it does turn off in March or April, we're still living on that top foot.
Yeah.
Josh, John, you guys top foot, top 18 inches, probably where most of our moisture is right now.
Yeah, but it does seem to be in some areas we are getting some saturation because we have filled up a few ponds in some areas, so that's always the good part about it. But
well, and moving forward with that, if we do, at what point do we get into the mobilization of the nutrients? Are we at that point?
Yeah. So I mean, anything applied in the fall or summer. So really, if you're talking about fall applied nitrogen to wheat, it was in the summer. It was August. It was September. It was hot.
Yeah.
If you put gas in September, our soil temps were warm enough where that anhydrous is a non-mobile ammonia. It would have been converted to nitrate before October 1st. And so the deal is I'm not worried about it going down to the deep. I'm worried about most of Oklahoma is a silt loam sitting over a clay on a slope. And so if we had sloping, so if you look at a wheat field and maybe you have water holding in low pockets, that's probably a lot of side slope movement where it goes, hits that clay layer, and then moves down. That is pulling nitrate. So what you're going to see in the wheat fields come February 1st is yellowing on your tops and your side slopes.
Right.
And the bottoms that probably haven't drowned out are probably going to be nice and green because you've had nitrate moving down.
With the, I don't want to say extremely cold weather because, I mean, this is just the flash freeze. This is what, this is what the northern Great Plains deal with all the time. We're just kind of, hey, we're in Oklahoma. Yeah. This is cold. Do we see any potential damage to the wheat? The crowns are good.
No.
So.
Yeah, we've hardened off. I'd have more questions about the canola acres that are out there.
Yeah.
Joshua.
That's the big issue is that we've been relatively warm for these cold, these freeze flashes or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of our canola is really large compared to what we would like. So that would be my main concern. Wheat is no concern whatsoever.
Right.
Canola, especially some of the bigger canola, got put in a little bit earlier, got a little bit more nutrients early and stuff like that. That's a big concern to potentially be going downhill a little bit more is that crop and especially those areas that it got relatively large very early in the fall.
And those are the two main winter crops out there. Whenever it comes to maturing past this, are we going to be looking at input issues with the winter crops, the broadleafs there?
Input issues?
Well, I'm much like what Brian was talking about, the nitrogen with the wheat. We'll be okay with that. Are we going to have any issues with that? Are the seeds going to be happy and fluffy? Refer back to that other
soil.
one. Come on, man.
He's had too many cinnamon rolls this morning.
It's the sugar, man. It's the sugar.
He's in a cinnamon haze.
No, I mean we're in a good situation to where, depending on what you put on canola in the fall, we have relatively clean fields, which is actually pretty shocking. I haven't seen that many wild mustards and all that in the canola fields that I have seen. So, going in and coming back in February or March when things are starting to warm up, that canola is starting to really grow again.
Right.
Is going to be fine.
Yeah.
We just got to get through these times, and these winters are kind of the winters that the reason why we like to be very modest with our inputs on canola early is because you never know when this is going to happen.
Right.
We don't want early fall growth, so we don't want to excessively put nitrogen, but we also don't want to spend a whole lot of money if we do have a crop failure, because some of our canola inputs are relatively expensive.
Yeah.
So,
well, and my last question, because I've been meaning to put down lime.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my soil tests say that my pastures need it. Now is the time to do it with the potential of more wet seasons ahead of us with the El Nino season.
I mean, when you're a pasture, and I mean, we got John Weir here, but when you're in a pasture situation, there's really, except for the peak growth period, you could lime in the fall,
right,
up through the early spring.
Yeah,
just get it on, Dave.
Okay, fine.
You've been talking about this since last summer.
Well, I'm finding the right time.
The economist would tell you that lime is highly valuable.
Right, that's right, and that's why I'm trying to find a time when it's not as valuable to afford it. but I tell you what, right along the county roads, boy,
beautiful.
It looks great. Yeah, so it's you have an enriched strip. This is my lime strip.
Lime strip, absolutely.
Well, that was a great lead in to our economist, Dr. Shannon Farrell. Thanks for coming by the booth here at the KNID AgriFest and talking with us. What's new in your world, sir?
Listening audience, I just want you to know that if you go to the KNID AgriFest, you could be randomly sucked into podcasts. So beware.
Hey, we're not shameful about that, you know. Yeah.
No, nor should you be. By the way,
we see somebody famous like you, and it's like, ooh, get him.
Well, go ahead,
I was going to say, you made eye contact. That's what the deal was. I was
There's
like,
the problem.
Oh, he's looking
right
at us. Shannon, over here.
So I will say, for those of you who don't know me, I'm our ag law specialist at Oklahoma State University, so I do a little bit more lawyering than I do economisting. But, as I look forward to 2024, it's kind of the same old story in that some of the perennial issues that are always out there are going to stay there. And then we got kind of some novel new stuff, too. Since I'm surrounded by agronomists, that always makes me think about leasing, right? Which is an ever more important part of the mix for lots of producers. Maybe can't afford it, but I need to go, lease it.
Right.
So I just want to remind everybody, since I showed up at Oklahoma State University in July of 2007, at least once a week, if not more frequently, I get a call to my office, and the call is always about how do I deal with this or that about some oral handshake lease, and the handshake occurred in 1964.
Exactly.
So I'm going to tell everybody, you might actually need a written lease that is very I know this is shocking. I saw looks of amazement on the crowd as I said that. But if you're going to sink tens of thousands of dollars of cost into an enterprise, maybe you write some stuff down.
Right, yeah.
And to the issues that we've been talking about on the podcast so far today, especially go through a good conversation between, owner and operator about who's responsible for what, what kind of cropping practices are we going to have, which kinds can we have, which kinds are absolutely prohibited, when do we start, when do we finish, and by the way, how much are we paying for this, and when are we paying, and how are we paying? And I tell everybody, some people say, well, a handshake's still a contract, and in some cases you might actually legally be right. But I want you to have a written lease for a number of reasons. One, the value of that might be in the conversation you have developing it. Because you're both going to think of issues that are going to pop up, and you're going to solve a lot of problems before they become problems. Two, writing that down, again, helps you clarify that. It gives a clear understanding between both of you.
Yeah.
And three, when I'm wearing my farm transition hat, I'm always talking about situations in which either the tenant or the landlord has changed because, someone's passed away.
Oh, yeah.
That written agreement is going to be so critical because if any of those parties change, they don't remember what you said over the handshake.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So having that written down is going to be so valuable for so many reasons. It's a no-brainer not to do it.
All right, so you brought up leasing. I've got a question in your time because, we've been at this about the same era. Have you seen a transition in the percent of leased acres going to a more cash rent over the traditional methods? And in a second, I want you to follow up with, because if you look at 30 years ago, the cost of what was associated has changed with inputs being a larger portion of the cost.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, I've seen 2 shifts, and I wish I had some better empirical data to tell you what's going on.
We don't do data here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize for even insinuating that you guys would do something like that.
Just broad ranges.
Just shooting from Farrell's hip here. So I've seen 2 things in my personal interactions with people. One, you're absolutely right. As we've seen more and more people inheriting land that maybe are 1 or 2 or 3 generations removed from an agricultural experience, they understand cash.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to get this check on this date. I don't want the risk. Just pay me that amount of money. And so you're right. I think I have seen more of a shift to cash. But the other trend I have seen is people that are at least savvy enough to kind of know the industry and its ups and downs and ins and outs. I've seen more people moving towards some hybrid lease forms. So it may be we have this base payment, but if there's this level of variability in yield or commodity prices, we're going to capture some of that upside. Now, interestingly, landowners are all about capturing upside. Sometimes not so much participating in downside.
Right.
So if you're going to engage in one of those, what we would call a hybrid agreement, it's really important to have a good education process between landowner and operator to say, hey, if these are the risks, then let's add some variability. If commodity prices go down or yields go down, do we get some adjustment there? That may be a harder sale for the landowner. But again, if we're going to participate in upside, we probably need to participate in the downside also.
Okay, you were building up to something.
Well, you made me forget. I'm sorry.
No, okay. You were talking about the proportion of those costs that are shared.
So that's why crop share and stuff is a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, again, honestly, in the Ag Economics department, we have talked about, should we have a course to teach folks that have not been on the farm how to own ag land?
Oh, yeah.
Because there are so many things to share with them about that. And it pops up, I think, perhaps most vividly when we're talking about a share lease. Because if I say, hey, you're in Oklahoma, you're going to share lease cropland, what fraction should be landowner and an operator? Everyone's going to say 1/3, 2/3. And I'm like, trick question. Are you talking about winter wheat? Are you talking about corn, soybeans, canola? And people are like, well, why would it be different? Like, there are lots of reasons it'll be different there. And so I think the value of having that conversation with someone about a share lease is like, well, let's lay on the table what the expenses are in this crop, how those can change, and who's participating in what. Before we started the conversation on the podcast today, we were talking about lime.
Yeah.
Who should bear the expense of that? And if it's the tenant, how long do they need to have that lease in place to make sure they recover the value of that soil amendment?
Which was my follow-up. In your time, have you seen the length of the cash rent change?
I have my
last question, gentlemen. I'm sorry.
And again, Shannon Farrell talking about what he's seen personally, but I have seen those tend to extend out. It's not when I started out. Everything I ever ran into was a 1-year lease. It's not at all uncommon these days for me to run into a 5-year lease. I've seen a couple of 10s. But I think importantly, too, in those longer-term leases, some producers and landowners are being foresightful enough to say we might need to do a market adjustment at some point along there. But we agree that, hey, you're going to have the access to this land so you can recoup whatever investments that you've made. But at some points we might have to benchmark to say we need to make an adjustment for this cost here or there.
So many times the contract is just setting the rules and making sure everybody knows what it is, and whenever it comes to that, I know the answer is consult a lawyer, but how do you even think about what could happen 10 years down the line? I mean, that's what if ownership changes in your lease, and what if all of a sudden the actual landowner says, well, I don't think we want to graze cattle on my land anymore. What if we were to actually take it to a crop? I mean, how do you as a lawyer look that far down the road to help build a good, fair contract for both sides?
Those are all excellent points that I want everybody to consider, and it really requires an attorney to sit down with the client and say, hey, let's talk about the history of this land.
Right.
Where is it? Because some attorneys might just say, okay, it's an ag land lease. All right, check these boxes. But I mean, I want to ask myself, number one, is this an area where cropping practices are changing significantly? For example, we're having a conversation about canola.
Right.
If I'd go back in time and talk to 1995 Shannon Farrell, he'd be like, what's canola?
It's that plant everybody takes pictures in front of. Yeah.
It looks pretty, So
it's the picture backdrop.
But we've talked about changes in cropping practices. How close am I to an area of urban expansion?
Right.
If I'm near a town that's growing a lot,
exactly,
I might have a lot of pressure that says, you know what, we're willing to buy this lease out because the development value of this land is so much different. One thing we saw back in the early 2000s was we had landowners that were just saying to oil and gas companies, go apply drilling fluid on the field, it's fine. Yeah. And the tenants were saying, excuse me, that's not really fertilizer, sir.
Right.
That's really not helping my yields a whole lot. But the issue that we now face in the 2020s is we're seeing tremendous growth in the wind and solar sectors. So if I'm getting offered $500, $750, $1,000 an acre for solar,
right,
the returns I'm getting on winter wheat in Oklahoma may not be matching up with that.
It's not comparable.
and so I think really to the heart of your question, Dave, what I would say is, let's look at trends, both agricultural and external to agriculture.
Right.
And if there needs to be ways for us to have pivot points to say, you know what, all the land around us is going organic.
Yeah.
We've got to have organic here, or no-till, or if a developer comes by and offers me more, how do we provide an off-ramp for the parties that's fair to them, in that circumstance? And this requires sitting down and really kind of thinking it through. And just like I said, it goes back to that dialogue process of helping you visualize what can happen.
Yeah, I guess it goes to just like a land manager, as the landowner and the potential landlord, you need to sit down and figure out your goals and objectives. What do you want this to be, and what do you want it to be 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, or what do I want to leave it for my kids or my grandkids to have? And that's a big thought, and just going in and doing it overnight a lot of times don't get it done.
And you've hit on an incredibly important point there, and that is talking about the long-term generational nature of that ag land ownership. And I think, and again, since half of what I do is farm transition planning, I always look at the world with transition-colored glasses. But, if I've got kids and grandkids that may be receiving this, I need to talk to them about my strategy here. And to say, hey, if I've got a long-term lease with this tenant of mine, kids, you have to understand that's coming with it. You don't get to just scrape that guy off because you want to do something different with that land. You need to understand that and have that conversation with them.
So then is that would be the time too to be talking about, and I know that's probably a whole different another ball game, but trusts and estates, setting those up for future, for a family kind of deal.
And I was actually having this conversation this morning with someone about a multi-generational farm operation where land, as is kind of typical, was the biggest chunk of the assets. On average, the U.S. farm balance sheet assets make up 82% of that asset value. It's hard to transfer, it's illiquid, and it might be a good investment if you take into account the appreciation of the land over time, but just looking at raw cash returns, it's not super attractive. And I think you have to say, hey, if land is the biggest chunk of this and we need this land to stay centralized as part of this farm operation, you guys need to understand that importance, and you need to understand that you're probably not going to see these phenomenal returns in terms of a percentage on return on an equity or return on investment. People see this land value, they see the decimal places in there because land values keep going up. And I'm like, that's cool if you sell it, but if you're not selling it, it's a very different return mindset, and you need to make sure that everybody understands what those returns look like.
Yeah, that's a bad thing. Landowners are poor, wealthy people.
Exactly. We are asset rich and cash poor.
Yep. We are.
So how many times have you seen you get a situation where the language in a contract just is too vague to finite details on there? Because I go to the thing, you talk about a 5-year lease. So let's not even talk about a 10-year lease. So let's talk about a 5-year lease. Well, the term conservation practice has changed drastically in 5 years. And so if that's written in, that's a very vague statement. And at, let's say we're in year 3, what if the landowner and the tenant has varied on what a conservation practice is in the last 2 years? So how do you address situations like that to where a contract is in place? It's a decent contract, but maybe the terminology is a little too vague.
I realize that podcasts are an audio medium, so you didn't see me stifle a laugh when Josh asked that question. Because the question was, how often do you see contracts that are too vague? And my answer is only, always, all the time, on days that end in Y. Yes.
Basically, the coffee spit just happened.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying not to do a spit take into Dave's very nice microphone.
I appreciate
when he asked that.
I do.
But no, I mean, the answer is it happens a lot. And for exactly the kind of reasons you talked about, we thought we had this term that was easily understood by both parties, like conservation practices or inputs. Well, inputs could be nitrogen, seed, could be soil amendments for pH balance, all those things, right? So what I would say is if you've gone down the road and you've recognized, oh, hey, there's a vagueness here, right? What is a conservation practice that's the requirement of the landowner or of the tenant? It's time to have that other conversation. And it's always acceptable to have a contract amendment to add clarity to what your agreement has, because so oftentimes when we have contract litigation, it's because of an ambiguity and the parties couldn't get together and just amicably agree on that. So it's time to have that conversation and say, hey, we've recognized things are shifting a little bit. Let's sit down, do the analysis, and figure out how to amend this so that we do have a clear understanding of what our respective responsibilities are here.
Well, and I'm sorry, that actually brought up a point that I was going to ask earlier. Do these things ever go to court? I mean, is this just people get angry at each other? Ooh, get off my land, or do do judges actually get in there? Right?
That dance is not for the weak at heart here.
People get
again, and it's an auditory medium. You guys are missing out so much.
Well, I'll be sure to put the dance in the closed captioning.
Yeah. In the alt text description, Dave dances seductively.
I would never have chose that word.
That is a bad word.
Awkwardly.
Okay.
I'm glad it was the lawyer that used it.
Oh my
It's in the eye of the beholder. So, okay.
We're setting you up with HR on Tuesday.
This is where Dave can
we're
edit
closed
this
Tuesday, so Wednesday.
out of the podcast, right? Yeah, it'll be at least Wednesday. So, to answer Dave's question.
Yeah. Okay.
It does. And so let's just talk a little bit about that. If we have a disagreement in the contract, and in the conversation we're having with Josh there just a second ago, we can't get ourselves to the table and come to an understanding. I'm here to tell you, come to the table, develop an understanding, because litigation is capital letters expensive.
Yeah.
Now the good news is, back when I was in private practice with our firm, 95% of our matters never saw the inside of a courtroom.
Right.
And for those that made it to litigation, the overwhelming majority of those literally got settled on the courtroom steps, because the second that you go into court, you've rolled the dice.
Yeah.
You control your destiny if you're working with the other party to try to come to some sort of negotiated solution. But the second you go into court, you're putting it in the hands of a jury, and you don't know what the outcome's going to be. People sometimes get really ramped up about principle. I always tell my students that principle is really expensive.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to do this because, by gosh, it's right, and it's the principle of the thing, like, you better have a lot of decimal points in that check that you're willing to write a lawyer, and I know everyone loves paying taxes and lawyers, about that.
Yeah.
So I'll give a plug for one of the other exhibitors here.
Yeah.
Mike Mayberry is here at AgriFest with the Oklahoma Ag Mediation Program. That's one of the reasons that ag mediation is there. Mediation is a process that's meant to get people to the table, and mediation is not like arbitration.
Right.
And arbitration is kind of like a private trial. You're just not involving the court. But mediation is designed to help the parties come up with their own solution, help them to kind of maybe get out of their space, look at things from the other party's perspective, and kind of try to figure out how can we resolve this without having to go to court, because, like I said, court's expensive.
Yeah, and most of the time, most of that stuff with litigation, stuff that I've been involved with and stuff is so minor, and it's almost like high school stuff. It's somebody's upset over something. I worked on an insurance case one time, and it was all about this person was upset because nobody come and said they were sorry. That's all it was about.
When I was in private practice, one of the attorneys I worked with, brilliant practitioner, had introduced legislation to make it such that evidence of a party offering an apology to the other party was not admissible in court, because people were afraid if I try to apologize, they'll say, see, you knew you were doing something wrong, when all that was needed was an apology.
Yeah, I know they've started trying to do that where that admission asking for apology is not doing that, because that was the whole deal, that nobody ever come and told them that they were sorry, and that's a big deal. So a lot of that stuff seems to stem from just misunderstandings, and I think it goes back to what you said is really good, is getting it down on paper, and also, just like you said too, because people pass away, people forget. I always live by the saying that a short pencil is better than a long memory, and that's exactly what you've got to do.
Nope, that's
but
exactly
going
right.
back to that and kind of what Josh's question, is there certain things in a contract when you're dealing with land like that you really want to be detailed about, and some stuff that you want to be vague about? I know I'm asking a lawyer about being vague, and it depends on which side of the fence the lawyer's on. Are you plaintiff or defense?
What do I want to be detailed about? Everything.
Yeah.
Now, so I'll run it down really quickly because I could go on about this for a long time. But if I'm engaging in an ag land lease, this is going to sound incredibly rudimentary. I want to be very clear about who the parties are. And the reason that I say that is, am I leasing this land in my individual capacity? Am I a married person? Is this land held in a trust? Is this land held in an LLC or a corporation? And is it being rented by a partnership, LLC, individual? Go on and on. But be clear about who the parties are. Have a clear legal description of what the actual property is, because the Ferguson place might mean all sorts of stuff to you, but it doesn't mean anything to anybody else. So let's have a clear legal description. Let's be clear about when occupancy starts and ends. So what's the term of the lease, and when can I come in? When am I going to go out? And then we start talking about rent. Is it cash? Is it share? Is it variable? Is it fixed? Is it paid annually? Is it paid in installments? And then another truly radical thing here, and this goes to a comment that Brian made earlier. I'm going to be really crazy. I'm going to make the term of that lease follow the production system.
Oh.
If I'm raising winter wheat in Oklahoma, I'm probably planting it in September. I'm probably harvesting it sometime in June. And why in the world would my lease term start on January 1st and end on December 31st?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When under Oklahoma law, if that's a renewing lease, I have to provide 3 months notice of termination. So that means I have planted my crop in September, and on October 1st, I get a notice, oh, hey, by the way, your lease is up. So make it follow your production system. And then beyond that, we kind of get into everything we've been talking about in the course of the discussion today. Let's talk about production systems. Let's talk about inputs, and make sure that both parties are in a clear understanding about what's my responsibility, what's their responsibility, what can be done, what has to be done, what absolutely can't be done. So in terms of, vagueness, I would say it kind of goes back to Josh's point. If we agree, like, for example, that conservation practices are going to be an important part of this, let's try to at least get some sort of definition of what those are, and then say, these types of practices are going to be the responsibility of the landowner. This is going to be the responsibility of the renter. But beyond that, too, one thing I've really started taking to is putting a table in the lease for things like government programs. And if this, specify the government program, any returns from this government program are X percentage to landlord, X percentage to tenant.
Yeah.
And lay all those out.
Yeah.
So in the broad strokes, that's kind of my checklist I want to make sure is in there.
Yeah, same thing with surface damages, pipeline coming through, anything
Condemnation
like
awards.
Yep.
Things like that. Absolutely.
So when it comes to I'm going to break down. I'm going to hire a lawyer to help me with the contract on this. Is there a specialized like a specialized lawyer practice that focuses in on this ag law, or can I go down to the local lawyer in Mayberry and say, hey, I need a contract that says this?
It's funny that we're having this conversation because it was fall of 23. I gave a webinar to a group of commercial real estate lawyers.
Oh, okay.
About ag leasing, and
okay.
like, take all this stuff that applies to strip malls, you forget that. Here's what we're talking about over here. So, I mean, anytime you have someone that's got an ag production background, they're going to have that industry knowledge and understand here are the important things. But, I would say at the end of the day, a real estate lease is one of the more common transactions that an attorney would see.
Yeah.
So if you can find somebody in a rural area that has some ag background, they should have enough expertise to kind of have a thoughtful conversation with you about that.
Yeah.
Now, if you're, and I'm not knocking any Oklahoma City or Tulsa firms, because I know I have lots of my students that work there.
Right.
But if you have somebody that's more familiar on the commercial side of things, you might have to do a lot of education for them to help them understand, well, here's some of the unique risks that we're trying to address that look a lot different in this land use versus what you're used to seeing.
And regardless, if you do get that detailed, regardless, have something in writing. 100%.
And by the way, this is something folks don't think about a lot. I encourage people to record their ag leases in the county land records.
Yeah.
And I was addressing a group of very sophisticated producers down in Texas last week, and when I said that, they looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, why would you ever do that? And I said, I've got a lot of reasons. But the whole reason for doing that is exactly the reason that county land records exist, and that is to provide public notice of that land interest.
Yeah.
So that if a heir comes along and inherits that property and they don't find the lease in mom or dad's records, but they're trying to do some title work because they're thinking about selling it, they're going to come across that lease and go, oh,
yeah,
I didn't know that was there.
Right.
But it also says anytime an oil and gas company is coming along and they're looking to do maybe a drilling mud application permit, they're going to see that go, oh, right. That notice function is really important for the parties.
Yeah. Well, and you also deal a lot with farm transitions, and so this is actually a great transition to that. This
nice
is something.
Segue, Dave.
You like that? Yeah. I don't just ride them; I also perform them. I've ridden one and I about wiped out. Anyway, but whenever it comes to thinking about leases and such into a multi-generational agreement, why is it so important to have everybody on board? Not just this generation, but have the next generation in there to get in on that conversation in planning the future for the land.
And we can look at this a couple of different ways in terms of internal and external. Like, for example, if we are talking about a farm heir that wants to come back and operate the farm, and they might be leasing that land from their non-farm heirs,
right,
or sometimes they call it the farm kid, city kid problem.
Right.
That's an important means of making sure that farm kid who's operating the farm enterprise has long-term access to that, but we're still providing some sort of cash flow to give to the off-farm heirs in the form of those rents. If we're looking at it from the more external perspective, letting your heirs know, hey, I've got a long-term lease with Brian over here for this farmland. When you get this land, if it's still under that lease, you guys are going to be subject to that too. So I want to bring you up to speed about what is needed from both sides for this to be profitable for both of us.
Yeah.
And then when that lease renews, okay, how do you educate yourself to figure out if it's worthwhile for you to both move forward with that, or if you need to part ways at that point?
Yeah, and it's always more. What I'm taking away is have it in writing, but also have a good conversation, in the beginning of that.
Communicate with everybody involved. Anybody that's a stakeholder, internal or external.
My grandpa always said, consult a lawyer. You're going to do it in the beginning or the end, so consult a lawyer.
And I'll tell you, it's a lot cheaper in the front than it is in the back.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for going on with us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Well, yeah, no problem. We just like I say, you made eye contact, and we're like, hey,
I've learned my lesson.
You should learn from here on.
I do got a comment. This should get us used to the new ag hall because of the glass. It's like we're in the fishbowl.
True.
We are just being stared at, so that's fun.
Yep.
Well, and when I used to do the Ag TV show, I would walk Ag, every floor of Ag Hall, and if there was a door open, guess what? They were on the show the next week.
Now they're all glass doors, so you don't even have to peek.
They all know now.
The door.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you again for going on with us.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And if you'd like to join the next discussion, send us an email or a tweet. Our handle is Red Dirt Ag. We'd like to thank Oklahoma State University's Dr. Shannon Farrell for joining us on the podcast from the Oklahoma Wheat Commission and the Oklahoma Wheat Growers Association booth at the KNID AgriFest this past week. And if you get a chance, head over to our website where you can find more information about our guests along with any of the resources that we talked about today or on any previous podcast. Just head over to reddirtagronomy.com. And for John Weir, Dr. Brian Ernell, and Dr. Josh Lofton, I am Dave Deacon, and thank you for listening. The proceeding is a copyrighted recording of Ag Now Media LLC 2024, and yes, all rights are reserved.